himself, as the Hakim assumed a more lofty and almost a commanding tone. "We take thee for our leech, not for our counsellor or conscience keeper." "And it is thus the most renowned prince of Frangistan repays benefit done to his royal person?" said El Hakim, exchanging the humble and stooping posture in which he had hitherto solicited the King for an attitude lofty and commanding. "Know, then," he said, "that every court of Europe and Asia, to Moslem and Nazarene, to knight and lady, wherever harp is heard and sword worn, wherever honour is loved and infamy detested, to every quarter of the world, will I denounce thee, Melech as thankless and ungenerous, and even the lands, if there be any such, that never heard of thy renown shall yet be acquainted with thy shame." "Are these terms to me, vile infidel?" said Richard, striding up to him in fury. "Art weary of thy life?" "Strike," said El Hakim. "Thine own deed shall then paint thee more worthless than could my words, though each had a hornet's sting." Richard turned fiercely from him, folded his arms, traversed the tent as before, and then exclaimed, "Thankless and ungenerous! As well be termed coward and infidel. Hakim, thou hast chosen thy boon, and though I had rather thou hadst asked my crown jewels, yet I may not, kinglike, refuse thee. Take the Scot, therefore, to thy keeping. The provost will deliver him to thee on this warrant." He hastily traced one or two lines, and gave them to the physician. "Use him as thy bond slave, to be disposed of as thou wilt. Only let him beware how he comes before the eyes of Richard. Hark thee, thou art wise. He hath been over bold among those in whose fair looks and weak judgments we trust our honour. As you of the East lodge your treasures in casks of silver wire, as fine and as frail as the web of a gossamer." "Thy servant understands the words of the King," said the sage, at once resuming the reverent style of address in which he had commenced. "When the rich carpet is soiled, the fool pointeth to the stain, the wise man covers it with his mantle. I have heard my lord's pleasure, and to hear is to obey." "It is well," said the King. "Let him consult his own safety, and never appear in my presence more. Is there aught else in which I may do thee pleasure?" "The bounty of the King hath filled my cup to the brim," said the sage. "Yea, it hath been abundant as the fountain which sprung up amid the camp of the descendants of Israel when the rock was stricken by the rod of Moussa ben Amram." "Ay, but," said the King, smiling, "it required, as in the desert, a hard blow on the rock ere it yielded its treasures. I would that I knew something to pleasure thee, which I might yield as freely as the natural fountain sends forth its waters." "Let me touch that victorious hand," said the sage, "in token that, if Adonbec el Hakim should hereafter demand a boon of Richard of England, he may do so, yet plead his command." "Thou hast hand and glove upon it, man," replied Richard. "Only if thou couldst consistently make up thy tale of patience, without craving me to deliver from punishment those who have deserved it, I would more willingly discharge my debt in some other form." "May thy days be multiplied," answered the Hakim, and withdrew from the apartment after the usual deep obeisance. King Richard gazed after him as he departed, like one but half satisfied with what had passed. "Strange pertinacity," he said, "in this Hakim, and a wonderful chance to interfere between that audacious Scot and the chastisement he has merited so richly. Yet let him live. There is one brave man the more in the world. And now for the Austrian. Ho, is the Baron of Gilsland there without?" Sir Thomas de Vaux, thus summoned, his bulky form speedily darkened the opening of the pavilion, while behind him glided as a spectre, unannounced yet unopposed, the savage form of the hermit of Engaddi, wrapped in his goatskin mantle. Richard, without noticing his presence, called in a loud tone to the Baron, "Sir Thomas de Vaux of Lanercost and Gilsland, take trumpet and herald, and go instantly to the tent of him whom they call Archduke of Austria, and see when the press of his knights and vassals is greatest around him, and is likely at this hour. For the German boar breakfasts ere he hears mass. Enter his presence with as little reverence as thou mayest, and impeach him, on the part of Richard of England, that he hath this night, by his own hand, or that of others, stolen from its staff the banner of England. Wherefore say to him our pleasure that within an hour from the time of my speaking he restore the said banner with all reverence, he himself and his principal barons waiting the whilst with heads uncovered, and without their robes of honour. And that moreover he pitch it beside it, on the one hand, his own banner of Austria reversed, as that which hath been dishonoured by theft and felony, and on the other a lance, bearing the bloody head of him who was his nearest counsellor or assistant in this base injury. And say, that such our behests being punctually discharged, we will, for the sake of our vow and the weal of the Holy Land, forgive his other forfeits. And how if the Duke of Austria deny all accession to this act of wrong and of felony? Said Thomas de Vaux. Tell him, replied the king, we will prove it upon his body, ay, were he backed with his two bravest champions. Knight-like we will prove it, on foot or on horse, in the desert or in the field, time, place, and arms all at his own choice. Bethink you of the peace of God and the church, my liege lord, said the Baron of Gilsland, among those princes engaged in this holy crusade. Bethink you how to execute my commands, my liege vassal, answered Richard impatiently. Methinks men expect to turn our purpose by their breath, as boys blow feathers to and fro. Peace of the church! Who, I prithee, minds it? The peace of the church, among crusaders, implies war with the Saracens, with whom the princes have made truce, and the one ends with the other. And besides, see you not how every prince of them is seeking his own several ends? I will seek mine also, and that is honour. For honour I came hither, and if I may not win it upon the Saracens, at least I will not lose a jot from any respect to this paltry duke, though he were bulwarked and buttressed by every prince of the Crusade. De Vaux turned to obey the king's mandate, shrugging his shoulders at the same time, the bluntness of his nature being unable to conceal that its tenor went against his judgment. But the hermit of Engaddi stepped forward, and assumed the air of one charged with higher commands than those of a mere earthly potentate. Indeed, his dress of shaggy skins, his uncombed and untrimmed hair and beard, his lean, wild, and contorted features, and the almost insane fire which gleamed from under his bushy eyebrows, made him approach nearly to our idea of some seer of Scripture, who, charged with high mission to the sinful kings of Judea or Israel, descended from the rocks and caverns in which he dwelt in abstracted solitude, to abash earthly tyrants in the midst of their pride, by discharging on them the blighting denunciations of divine majesty, even as the cloud discharges the lightnings, with which it is fraught on the pinnacles and towers of castles and palaces. In the midst of his most wayward mood, Richard respected the church and its ministers, and though offended at the intrusion of the hermit into his tent, he greeted him with respect, at the same time, however, making a sign to Sir Thomas de Vaux to hasten on his message. But the hermit prohibited the baron, by gesture, look, and word, to stir a yard on such an errand, and, holding up his bare arm, from which the goatskin mantle fell back in the violence of his action, he waved it aloft, meagre with famine, and wheeled with the blows of discipline. In the name of God and of the most Holy Father, the vicegerent of the Christian Church upon earth, I prohibit this most profane, bloodthirsty, and brutal defiance betwixt two Christian princes, whose shoulders are sieged with the blessed mark under which they swore brotherhood. Woe to him by whom it is broken! Richard of England, recall the most unhallowed message thou hast given to that baron. Danger and death are nigh thee. The dagger is glancing at thy very throat. Danger and death are playmates to Richard, answered the monarch proudly, and he hath braved too many swords to fear a dagger. Danger and death are near, replied the seer, and sinking his voice to a hollow, unearthly tone, he added, and after death the judgment. Good and holy father, said Richard, I reverence thy person and thy sanctity. Reverence not me, interrupted the hermit. Reverence sooner the vile insect that crawls by the shore of the Dead Sea, and feeds upon